Alright, welcome back. In this final video over Caustics, what we're going to do is start to focus on tweaking the quality of the render. So let's go ahead and tweak this caustic effect to look really good. So let me cancel out that render region. I'm going to hit F12 so we're looking through this camera view here. And I'm going to do render region at about this area right here, which is mainly where the caustics are being displayed here. Okay, not too bad. And actually, I might want to see the caustics on this side as well because I did have a little bit of blotching there. But to not end up making a super huge render region over here, it's going to take longer to render. Although it's rendering pretty quick. What I'm going to do instead is use the preview button. So I'll hit preview. And again, I'm using the size of 640 by 480. And I showed in some earlier videos how to make it 640 by 480 in the preview window. So I'm not going to go over that again right now. Alright, so this is what we've got. We have some speculine, we have some blotching here of the photons. They're not landing very accurately, and it looks like we have a shortage of photons. So let's go ahead and fix all of this. I'm going to lock this down right here. That way it forces me to have to manually refresh by hitting this manual refresh button up here with the two arrows. That way it's not updating on me all the time and just slowing me down. So let's go over here to render. Let's go to renderer options. We're going to pin this down, and we're also going to go over here to explore. Let's go to lights. Let's pick up our spotlight and open up its shader PPG. Let's lock that down as well, and I'm going to collapse this soft light parameter area by clicking on soft light here, just so it's smaller and cleaner. Okay, what I'm interested in here is the number of photons in this area to control the quality, just like global illumination. And then I'm interested in all these accuracy settings over here, as well as this sharpness filter, which is going to help me to fix up and tweak and tune this overall caustic effect. So first things first, we're not going to get much done with only 10,000 photons. As you've seen now from your experience with global illumination so far, 10,000 is a very small number of photons. And the same goes not only for global illumination, but also for caustics. So let's go ahead and crank that up to 100,000. And unlike global illumination, we really don't need 10 billion photons to make this look good. When you're working with caustics, you can actually get away with a small number of caustic photons. So let's go ahead and hit the manual refresh button. I forgot about that. I actually forced it to manual mode. So there goes, it's million photons, and it does it pretty quickly. And you should see a bit of a difference here. I can already see a big difference right here in this area, and over here my splotching effect completely went away without changing any other setting, just by changing the number of photons. So 100,000 photons looks like it's going to be the right number to use. So as you can see, caustics works a little bit differently, where we don't have to use millions and millions of caustic photons. 100,000 can actually be good enough. It depends also on your scene. So let me collapse that just to get out of the way. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is go over here and start using these settings in the renderer options, especially under the accuracy parameters, and start controlling the way that this looks. Okay, so I'm going to close this because I want to zoom in here a little bit so we can get a better look at the caustic effect. And let me go down here and hit preview. And again, I'm going to go ahead and lock this down so it's in manual refresh mode. Oh, shouldn't have done that in the middle of a render. I'm going to have to refresh that. Don't worry, I'll just step in my little time machine here and go forward in time. And there we go, instant render. As a side note, if you want to become an overnight millionaire, I suggest you go and become a computer engineer if you're not already one, and create a renderer or some kind of device that can make these types of renders instantaneous. I guarantee you, you will become an overnight millionaire. Alright. So now we're closer and we can get a better look at this effect, which is perfect. This is actually a great view right here. And I locked it down. That way I can go ahead and manually refresh this whenever I want. Now let's go over here to caustic accuracy. The caustic accuracy doesn't go in the slider as high as global illumination accuracy. If you remember, global illumination accuracy goes up to about 4,000. Caustic accuracy goes up to 1,000. We can always overdrive that by typing in a higher number in the numerical field. I'm going to go ahead and use something like 512, which is going to be about midway through, and that should be good enough. Now let me go ahead and refresh that and see what the difference is here. And this is what we have now. Increasing the caustic accuracy actually did smooth out a little bit of the artifacting that was actually located right here and fixed that up. That actually looks much, much better. Very nice around this area. Fixed up a lot of the nasty artifacting that I had in this general area. Okay, we can actually tweak this a bit more. Now we have a photon search radius. Now this search radius, it works the same and doesn't. It does and it doesn't as the global illumination. It's going to work a little bit differently than global illumination. For example, if I go ahead and crank this up to, say, 2.5, which is pretty small. When you're using global illumination, let me go ahead and manually refresh that. When you're using global illumination and you're using a small radius like this, you're usually going to get a speckled result. You can actually see the photons and things. However, when you're using it with caustics, that number is too large. It smooths out the caustic photons too much. So you basically lose all of the detail of the effect. It just takes it and smooths it out like crazy. So you end up with this sort of a very bland, subtle caustic effect. We can still see the concentrated caustic effect right here, especially in this area here. But it doesn't look as good as it used to. We lost all the detail of it, you see, which may not be a good thing to do. So using a photon search radius of 0, essentially forcing mental rate to choose a number for you, can in most cases be the best thing to do, even though that wouldn't be the best thing to do when you're using global illumination. So that's why I said that the search radius works kind of the same as global illumination, but at the same time is completely different. Just one of those things. If we use a really small number, like 0.1 for example, and let's go ahead and refresh this, and let's jump forward in time. All this jumping around forward and backwards in time can't be good for you. That's got to cause some kind of long-term side effect, like brain damage or something, but I'll worry about that later. You can see now we get a speckled result here, where we get kind of this feathered speckled result that has some little bit of blotchiness around these areas and things. That's because our photon search radius is so small. It's going to be a pretty accurate calculation though, very accurate. And if you want to go ahead and fix that, go ahead and add more photons, shoot more photons out of your spotlight here. So more than 100,000 is going to take care of that. Of course, you're going to probably get a more accurate, physically accurate and plausible effect, but your render times are going to increase, of course, because you're shooting out more photons. Now in this case, the caustic effect looks good enough with a search radius of 0, so there's really no point in going for a really tiny and tight search radius. So I would leave it to 0. If you're seeing that you don't like those results, go ahead and increase it to a larger number, well, larger number being 0.1 or 0.05 or something like that, which isn't going to be that large to begin with. Now the photon merge factor works the same as the photon merge factor in global illumination, where it's going to try to go ahead and merge photons whenever you have a blotchy effect to try to compensate. I strongly recommend you don't use this feature, however, because again, like with the other features like final gather and global illumination, it's kind of a cheap trick to try to smooth out this blotchiness. And the blotchiness is being caused because there just isn't enough photons. So to tell the renderer, forget the photons, go ahead and cheat your way and use this merge factor, you're going to be hurting your renders in the end, and I strongly recommend you don't do that because it hurts your quality. So leaving it at a default value of 1 is good enough. Okay, we have a sharpness filter down here, and this sharpness filter can be used to adjust the caustic effect in a very, very subtle way. So here's what I'm going to do. Let me actually go ahead and refresh that, because I did make a few changes. In the refresh version, we shouldn't have this splotchy effect. Let me go ahead and jump forward. Oh, actually, I don't have to jump forward in time. That was pretty quick. Well, this part's going to take a while to render because of the ray tracing. So let me go ahead and go forward in time. Okay, that's good. So now we have our nice photon effect here. Okay, over here in sharpness filter, we have 3 different filters we can use. We can use a box, a cone, and a Gaussian. Box I would use for preview rendering and things. I wouldn't really use it for final render. I would rather use a cone or Gaussian. Cone's going to give you a sharper caustic effect. Gaussian is going to try to blur out the edges of it, so it's going to try to get rid of some of that sharpness. So Gaussian is going to soften it up a bit more. The size of the filter is going to determine the influence of the actual filter. So a smaller size is going to give you a very subtle effect, and you may not even be able to see the effect of these different filters at all. unless you get really close there and analyze that picture very well. But if we increase the size of the filter, then we will be able to see a bit of a difference. Now, let me go ahead and close this preview window so we can use the render regions little feature here for saving different renders. And what happened right now is that I got a warning message down there on the lower interface of XSI in orange, as you can see. It says blah 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 blah, caustic filter constant should not be smaller than 1.0 set to 1.1. Well, what Mentoray is trying to say in its crazy alien language is that it wants this filter size to be set to a minimum of 1.1. So let's go ahead and put in 1.1 to go ahead and make Mentoray happy, because a happy Mentoray means that you're going to be a happy render artist when working in your scenes. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and use a cone filter with a very small setting here, and let's go ahead and refresh that. So we're emitting photons down here in the lower right, and there we go. And we're going to actually go ahead and save this image out. And now let's switch over to, say, a Gaussian filter, and let's increase the filter size to the maximum, which is 5. That way you can really see the effect, which is actually going to be very subtle. It's going to be hard to see the effect without being able to compare these images, which is awesome that they included this feature in exercise 6 to be able to compare images in the render region. Okay, so there we go. So here's the before. Notice the caustic effect here, especially in these well-defined areas. That's when we're using a cone filter with a size of 1.1, so it's a very sharp effect. Now, when we look at the after, you'll notice there is a pretty good difference, although it's extremely subtle. Look at these areas over here, these highlight areas where the caustics are hitting. We got a pretty narrow band that's pretty well defined. And if we go over here and move this over and look at the after, which is with the Gaussian effect with a large filter size, we notice that we lose that definition and this becomes blurrier and just it gets more smoothed out. We essentially get that nice blurring effect from the Gaussian filter. So it's a very subtle effect and hard to see. Like I said, we had to zoom in here and do a render region and do comparison images to be able to actually see the difference of this caustic effect. If you were far away, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference, to be honest with you. Even somebody with a trained CGI probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference either. So it's a very subtle effect, but at least the controls are there, so if that's what you want to go for, you can go ahead and go for it. And honestly, in my personal opinion, my design preference, I like the cone filter with a small filter size because this blurred out value, I'm really not digging that too much. I prefer this more defined caustic effect here. So I would leave it to a cone filter with a size of 1.1, which was making Mentoray happy earlier. But of course, Mentoray, as flexible and versatile as it is, gives you all these options so you can be in complete control of whatever it is that you're rendering out. So, with that said, the last option here for optimization, of course, is the photon map file, but we already went over that in global illumination. It works the same exact way. All you do is define a photon map file, so I can go in here and type in caustic.phmap, hit enter, and with the rebuild option on, what's going to happen is every time you go ahead and render out this caustic effect, it's going to render out this map to your hard drive, and Mentoray is going to always be able to go back to this map and use it, especially when you turn rebuild off. So it doesn't have to rebuild that over and over and over again. So that looks pretty good. The last thing that would be left to do is go over here to the rendering tab of the Mentoray options and turn your anti-aliasing up. So let's go something like 0 and 2 to not go too crazy and too high with this. And we're going to go ahead and emit those photons out, which does pretty quick. The good thing about Caustics is that we don't have to use millions of photons. We can get away with using only 100,000 photons, as you saw right here. Now, of course, you can increase the number of photons and keep getting a more physically accurate result, but the result's not going to look much different or much better than what we're getting right now. It's going to be, again, a very subtle effect, kind of like with that cone and Gaussian filter we were just looking at, so it won't make a huge difference. So I increased the anti-aliasing. I have a nice crisp image. This looks a lot better than before. If you want this to look even better, you can go to your Spotlights PPG. So we can keep adding more and more of these photons and get a better and better effect, but this is actually going to be really, really good. Okay, so that does it for doing caustics with Mentor. As you can see, it's another awesome feature in the arsenal in Mentor's tool set to help you render out photorealistic images and create all kinds of neat lighting effects with your scenes.